Hey, good morning everyone. I'm Nick Slavic. I am the proprietor of the Nick Slavic Painting and Restoration Company. I am also the host of this show, Ask a Painter Live, on Facebook every Friday morning, where I use my 2 decades of painting, restoration, wallpaper, color consultation experience to answer all your questions live. Now you can send these questions live during the stream here. You can type them in on the side or the bottom, send them to me and I will address them. Otherwise you can send your questions during the week, after this. Get a hold of me anyway and I'm happy to do it. If you All right, folks, we are battling some tough signal out here today. It's kind of a bad weather day and I'm out here on the farm. So bear with me here. The feed might be a little choppy, but we'll move forward. Today's topic is painting your kitchen cabinets. This was a topic asked last week when we were deep in conversation about restoring wood doors, fiberglass doors on the front of houses. And Amanda Hoffman, a viewer, she had asked, well, what's the basic process for painting your kitchen cabinets? And for that suggestion, I will send Amanda one of these. Thank you for your question. Now, I will cover the basic process of painting your kitchen cabinets. I will also cover a few products to use, and if there's time at the end, I will go over some colors, some design schemes, some special techniques, decorative stuff that I've done in the past, and certainly on the side here, guys, send in any questions you have as I'm plowing through this. It'll be about a week or two process condensed down into about 20 minutes here to kind of illustrate how we do that, and I have some examples of stuff for you guys today too. So, step one, assess if your cabinets are able to be painted. If you like the layout, if they're of good sound construction, they are good candidates for repainting. If they have a lot of those ends where it's a sticker or a real cheap veneer that looks like wood, consider having those covered, or consider not doing them and replacing them with something else. But if you like the layout of all your cabinets, if everything is where you want it and they're still in good shape, they are great candidates for repainting, especially when you consider the cost for replacement. If you replace your cabinets, you're still going to have to paint them. So understand that as you go through this process. And all through this process, this is one of the most popular topics that I have questions on. Not only do I do 2 or 3 estimates for kitchen cabinets to be painted every week, I get tons of questions, just people wondering what the process is, how to do it on DIY, on HGTV, all these other shows. That's usually the first thing they do to a house. We need to paint these old kitchen cabinets. So it's one of those things where it's ever present. You see everybody else doing it, but bear in mind it is the most technically difficult project to do painting wise in your house, minus a few other specialized things. So as we go through this process, it's a simple process. The theory behind it is no different than painting anything else you would ever paint, but it just has tons of pieces, tons of moving pieces, ins and outs, this and that, and it's a very technical job. So as we go through this, you guys just let me know if I'm breezing over something that I shouldn't. So step one, disassemble your cabinets and label everything. All the doors, all the drawers should come off. Where you take the hinges off, sometimes they have the round holes in the back where the hidden hinges are. Sometimes they're just an overlay hinge. On every door, there's some place where you can take a Sharpie and you can actually write the number cabinet door. I use a simple numbering system, top to bottom, left to right, starting at 1 and going to however many they have. If there's an island, I label each of those with an I for island. It seems pretty simple, but when you have somewhere between 40 and 60 doors and drawers to deal with, every one of them is going to look the same once you paint them, and you think, well, I'll remember this one is a unique shape. It'll take you about 10 times as long to put those doors up if you don't label them. So label those. I use a Sharpie, and then once I label where the Sharpie is, and remember we're doing this where a hinge is going to go, so it's going to be hidden in the final thing, I take a small square of masking tape and I put it over the number so that when we prime it and we paint it, that masking tape will be there. At the end you peel it off, your number's still there. Otherwise you're just going to prime over it and lose it. So once you have them all disassembled, once you have them all labeled, you go through and you start prepping the surface. Most people spend way too much time on the wrong areas of prep for kitchen cabinets. You do not need to get cabinets down to wood, although that's a great process. It takes way too long, and as labor costs go up, you run into replacement cost at some point if you're going to spend 100 hours sanding your cabinets down to bare wood. And remember, most of these cabinets nowadays, there is a lot of solid wood still used, but a lot of it is going to be veneer. So you're not going to be able to grind away at this stuff. you'll burn through the veneer, and then you're sort of making divots and everything like that. So keep in mind that my normal process is, obviously, if a finish is failing, if a finish is gone, if you feel that a finish has delaminated or in any way is not serviceable, obviously that has to be removed. And I do that with a series of mouse sanders, random orbital sanders, sanding sponges, things like this to get into little areas. And so once you've addressed all the areas, normally you have your couple cabinet doors under the kitchen sink. Those get a lot of water, so the finish will usually be poor. Look for the silverware drawer and look for the stuff around the stove, the stuff that gets a lot of use. You want to make sure that you get all the old finish off that is not serviceable anymore. Now, if a finish is serviceable, it's good, and it's adhered well, all you have to do is use one of these to scuff sand it. Now, you're not removing a lot of material. You're basically just roughing up the surface, giving what's called teeth in it so that the primer can stick to it. Don't take this for granted. A lot of people skip this step, and even between coats, between primer and enamel, we do the same thing to give it that teeth. If you do this, you have a chance of having delamination between the different coats of stuff there. So it's a very simple process. It doesn't take that much time to scuff sand it and clean it off and move forward like that. Once you have scuff sanded everything, once you've removed all the old finish, it's time to shop vac it all off. I use a series of brushes like this with a shop vac to get in all the little areas. This really helps. It agitates the dust, gets it off the surface, and then it goes back into the shop vac. After you've shop vaced it all off, I use microfiber kitchen towels. I soak them as far as they'll go. You wring almost every drop of that water off till it's almost dry to the touch, and then wipe all the rest of that powder off like that. You should be left with a perfectly dust-free surface. When you wipe your finger across, nothing should come onto it. At this point, I start doing my adhesion test, and for those of you who have seen more than one of these, you know that I'm a huge fan of the scratch test and the crosshatch test. The scratch test is where you basically find a door, find a drawer, find something out of the way, test out your primer on it, let it dry overnight, and come back and you take your fingernail and you try as hard as you can to scratch it off. If it does not scratch off, you're good to go. At that point, you can either do another test just to make sure, or you can take for granted or assume that the finish will adhere. The crosshatch test is same thing. Put your primer on overnight, come back with a utility knife and lightly score in kind of a checkerboard fashion. Put a piece of masking tape over, burnish it down real hard with your hands, and peel it off. If anything comes off on the back of that masking tape, then you know you're going to have some adhesion issues. So if it passes both tests, you're good to go on prime. I'm a fan of oil primer. I'm also a fan of, this last year I've been experimenting with Benjamin Moore's Advanced Primer. I'm liking this new sort of hybrid technology and all this, and I'll get into that when we talk specifically about coatings. But I'm a fan of traditional products, as most of you know. Oil primers, oil paints, things like that. Slowly, I'm seeing the way the wind's moving here, and I don't think a lot of these traditional products, in the sense that we know them, are going to be here 10 years from now. So I'm readying myself for when things become either hybrid or 100% water-based. And so yeah, I've been experimenting with those, and oil primer is still readily available. You can get it anywhere. It's very cheap stuff. I will use that until the last can is made, but in this past year, I've been experimenting with some of the hybrid primers like this. So technically, this is an oil primer immersed in water. It's got some other technology that goes along with it. In all my adhesion tests, every job now that I do oil primer, I do the hybrid, and I also do a water-based primer, just to see if they're improving the water-based primers too. Every time my oil primer works. So far, every time these hybrid primers, and when I speak of hybrid primers, you know, I talk about readily available products that anybody who sees this can find. Benjamin Moore, Sherwin-Williams, other stuff like that. Those are sort of the leaders in the market. Every time the oil primer works. Every time so far, the hybrid primers worked, and about 8 to 9 times out of 10, the water-based primer will work. So everything's good. I mean, I still feel comfortable. There's a lot of options out there. Even if you use a water-based primer, not the end of the world, but if you're using a water-based primer only because you don't want the smell, you're really losing out on some really good adhesion in there. So you apply your primer, sprayer, brush, roller, something like that. I'm a huge proponent of spraying or brushing. Rollers, I am not a fan of at all. If you are using a weenie roller or a small microfiber roller just to get the paint on and then tipping it off with a super fine bristle nylon or otherwise brush, that's fine. In my experiments, I have got much smoother finishes with a brush, or at least finishing off with a brush, than I have with just the roller. The rollers leave that stipple, that little bit of kind of orange peel sort of texture on there. So I'm not a huge fan of that at all. But again, if you're just applying it, that's fine. But you're still going to have to get a brush to get in all the little crevices, all the little things like that. A roller will really slop that stuff around in there, and I find it doesn't really save, you know, a pro any time than to do that. So I finish cabinets traditionally all by brush. I finish cabinets professionally in my shop or in the people's home with a sprayer. It's usually whatever the job dictates. I'm kind of a fan of both. As long as you use a good system, super high quality brushes, and do it in a sort of you know, technically proficient manner, you can get a very, very smooth finish with this stuff. So once your primer's on, I usually give everything overnight. A lot of products say, you know, some oil primers are dry in 1 hour. Some products say 4 hours to recoat or to sand or to whatever. I still give things overnight. I find that, especially with cabinets, it's a very time-consuming process. If you wait the minimum time to either sand or recoat something, it doesn't sand or recoat as well as it does when you leave it dry overnight. So for the little bit of time that you know, it takes to do that, I wait the time, and then I come back and it just sands beautifully, or it scuffs the next day beautifully and recoats wonderfully. So just give it time. And most people, when you're doing a kitchen like that, it's going to take you all day to put a coat on stuff anyway. So you know, it's not one of those things where you can do 2 or 3 coats in a day anyway. So I just relax, you know, let the process do its stuff. So once the primer is on there, dry overnight, you want to come back and you want to sand it again. And I use a hand sanding for this process. The oil primer is going to be nice and smooth, but it's still going to be the tiny bit rough. So fine sanding pads, every surface gets a sand, and you'll feel it'll just be perfectly glass smooth on there. When I do that, you're going to make a lot of sanding dust. So again, with the Shop Vac, vacuum that stuff off. Again, with the microfiber, get all the talcum powder off of there. And at this time, you want to address any defects in the cabinets. If there's dents, if there's cracks that are not the cracks in the cabinet doors, things like that, fill those. If you're changing out hardware and they need a different hole configuration or hinge configuration, I'm a big fan of automotive Bondo, the 2-part stuff that you mix together, the red and the gray, and let that dry overnight, sand that smooth. That stuff is rock hard. It's fairly stable when used inside of a house. Don't use drywall mud, don't use spackle, don't use any of that stuff. It's very soft, and you'll just push your finger right into it and through it. So there's other wood fillers and things like that, but I find that those are fairly soft too. On bigger holes, you're going to need to do 2 passes with the Bondo because it does shrink a tiny bit when it dries. Other than that, once you've addressed all the defects, at this point, what I see in a normal construction of a cabinet with the floating panel and the rails and stiles around it, a lot of people will try to fill these cracks in here. That's a huge no-no. These panels, they're called floating panels because they actually move seasonally. When it's hot, when it's cold, when it's humid, when it's dry, the wood expands and contracts, and that panel actually needs to float around inside this. So on some panels in a middle of winter, you can actually move them with your hands a little bit. So worst case scenario, I've seen this happen in a few houses where people take silicone caulk or painter's caulk, fill that crack completely, and when the stuff moves, it'll actually kind of break it apart, crack it, things like that, and it gets all gummy, and it just doesn't do a good job in there. So, and then you have to, of course, go back and take it all out, which is kind of a disaster. So yeah, don't fill those, but otherwise fill all the cracks, fill any defects, other things like that. Once you sand your stuff, again, tack rag it off, and then you're ready to top coat. I'm a fan of oils, I'm a fan of hybrids, and I'm a fan of water-based stuff. If I have my choice, I'll use oils or hybrids. And any of the big brands I'm fairly proficient with. I try to keep up on that stuff. They're sort of the leading edge of the market, the Benjamin Moores, the Sherwin-Williams, things like that. PPG actually has a product called Breakthrough, which many people have been giving good results on. I just haven't found a good job to use it on yet. But as soon as I do, I will give you guys a review of that stuff. Basically, a hybrid is basically, you know, a good one. Sherwin-Williams makes their Pro Classic hybrid. Benjamin Moore makes the Advance. Comes in different shine levels. I find that satin is the most appealing to me and to a lot of my customers. If you go semi-gloss, if you go gloss, I've actually done experiments with gloss Advance and other things, and through the process, it doesn't actually get too much more shiny than a lot of the satins or the semi-glosses, unless you start buffing them out with automotive buffers, which is a whole nother ball of wax to do. But a good Impervo, this is the old traditional oil here. This one happens to be the premixed black. This is a beautiful, beautiful black. That's a pure oil enamel like that. You can get that in any color usually. It takes a little while to dry. It's a little bit tacky, but it sands absolutely beautiful. It dries to a nice hard finish, so you can sand it. The reason I don't use WaterBased exclusively is because it just doesn't feel like it dries as hard as the other stuff. Even when it's fully cured, 20, 30 days, something like that, I still can sand the hybrids and the oils a heck of a lot better than a WaterBased. But the WaterBased is still a good product. Don't forgo it. I still use it every once in a while. Sometimes when you get a very deep color on an island, sometimes you have to switch to the pure WaterBased, something like that. Not a big issue, still a good product, but if I have my druthers, it's going to be an oil or a hybrid. So you want to apply it just like the primer, with a sprayer, with a brush, with a roller, something like that. You just want to observe mill thickness. I have a mill thickness gauge in my shop, and with my spraying equipment, it's simply a little thing with teeth on it. You once you spray down your cabinet doors, or once you brush on your cabinet doors, you take this toothed piece of metal and you stick it into the finish, pull it out, and whatever tooth that the last tooth that the paint sticks on will tell you how deep your finish is. And in the shop, I've done enough of them where I can get usually a fairly consistent finish. But if you're a homeowner and you're doing it in your garage or your shop, you want to test out your finish, that you're not applying it too thin or too heavy. And usually after about 1 or 2 cabinet doors, you can gauge how slow your rate of production has to go. With a brush, you're going to apply it a little bit less. Mill thickness gauge usually isn't going to be a concern. You can just go ahead and put that on. If you're applying it with a roller and then tipping it off with a brush, you may want to check it, because the roller has a little more tendency to leave a thicker finish on there. So once you get your first coat of enamel on there, like I said, I like to finish all of my cabinet doors flat. What that means is I get everything primed, and then I do 1 coat on one side, let it dry overnight, scuff sand it, tack rag it off, and do the second coat. And once that's cured, then I flip it over, and then I do the same process to the other side. Obviously doing the back side first, flipping it over, so then when it does its final cure, it's all resting on the back side of the cabinet door. So you got your first coat of enamel on, you've waited overnight, it's nice and dry. I go back and I scuff sand between coats to promote adhesion. Again, we're not removing material, we're basically just giving that surface a little bit of tooth with a fine sanding pad, just so the next coat can adhere to it well. And at this point, it usually doesn't make too much dust. A lot of the time, me and the boys will just take microfibers that are wetted down, and we'll get the rest of that stuff off. When you apply your last coat, make sure your temperature is good. Make sure there's not a lot of moving air around where you are. Make sure there's no bugs flying around. And you got to be careful of humidity too. If it's a very humid day, a cool day, like we're looking at today, it's 56 degrees right now and probably 100% humidity. This would be a tough one. You might want to turn on a heater in a shop just to get that through. One note on these products, and a trick I use in my shop, is that when paints are rated for drying time, for recoat time, for sandability, things like that, a lot of them test at 77 degrees, which is normally much higher than any house or shop is. When I finish cabinets in my shop, normally what I do is I pump up the shop to 77, 78, something like that, finish my cabinets, turn that furnace off, and then kind of let it coast until those cabinets are, within a half hour, they're usually kind of tack free, and then I'll fire up the furnace again, just so they don't have direct air blowing on them there. But that 77 degrees, pumping up the heat in the shop, it snap dries those cabinets just so they don't get a lot of dust stuck on there too. So, little tip, just be careful with fans. If you're blowing a lot of air around, if you have a little bit of dust on the floor, it'll start circulating that around, and you'll find that you make yourself a rough finish. So after your second coat is dry, usually the next day I will pack up my cabinet doors from my shop, take them to the homeowner's house, and then install everything, test everything, usually adjust a few doors here and there, and then kind of clean it up. That's basically the process. If I missed anything special that you guys want to hear more on, if there's something I was unclear on, please let me know here. I'll scroll back in a few minutes here and see what questions we have. I'll talk about color for a little bit. There are 10,000 OffWhites, and any of the pros who are tuned into this will know that some of the hardest colors for homeowners to pick are these OffWhites. There's subtle hues, and depending on the light of the day, people read a lot into these off-whites. And I don't want to say there's nothing behind that, but people spend a lot of time on that when really, you know, there's about 4 or 5 whites and off-whites that just about everyone uses. And if you work for designers, or if you have a designer work for you, you know, if I had to bet money on it, I could list 5 or 6 off-whites, and almost every one of those would be on everybody's hit list. And again, this isn't from any special knowledge of the stuff. It's just from working for 20 years and seeing that, you know, certain things work really well, and a lot of people, when something works well, really don't need to deviate from that. So to show you kind of the I basically have, when I start people off on my color consultations for cabinets, I basically tell them there are 3 kind of things you can do as far as off-white goes. 4 if you consider color. There's pure white. There is basically what I would consider the Navajo white over and underline, which you know, you can see on this cabinet door here. This is PM2 white, Benjamin Moore's premixed white, or their kind of go-to stock white. This is Benjamin Moore Navajo white. 99% of all cabinets are finished somewhere between here and somewhere between here. Navajo white is my line of demarcation between off-whites and tans. If you go much deeper than a Navajo white, you will get a color, a tan, a deep cream, or something like that. So this is still considered off-white. When I do kitchens in this Navajo white or something similar to it, everybody still walks into the kitchens and say, "Oh, I love your white cabinets." If I go darker than this, people say, "Ooh, what an interesting tan," or what, you know. So I found that this is the mental line of demarcation that most people use. Halfway in between here is the proverbial white dove, dove white, decorator's white. There's only a couple ones that a lot of people use in there, but they're almost halfway between there. Most people do not pick pure white. I have pure white in my kitchen because I have pure white appliances, so I thought that went well. But I also have this on the woodwork on my second floor. So I'm a huge fan of this, but because I have white appliances, I use this. If stark white is not going to work for you, and this is too much of a cream buttermilk kind of color, the white dove, the dove white, the decorator's white, and I just use Benjamin Moore colors when I talk about this. Almost every designer and home builder I work for mainly dabbles in those, so I have the most experience with those. But every paint manufacturer has the equivalent of the Navajo, the premixed, and the white dove. And as you look through all the fan decks, everybody has a dove white, a white dove, a dove white, a white dove. It's all interchangeable. They're all within about 1% of each other. So very universal sort of color stuff. Now on the bottom side here, I should show you maybe the 4th option. If you're not using white, if you're not using off-white, or if you're not using the intermediary, you also have a color. This one happens to be pure black oil, the Oil and Pervo from Benjamin Moore. This is over. I actually, to simulate the cabinet finishing process, bought a cabinet door, finished it with a bunch of oil varnish like I normally do, and then I did my process on this here. And the other question that people have about oak cabinet doors and things like that is an issue of the grain. And if I can show you guys that there, you see the grain in these cabinet doors, but it's universal, and I've never had a complaint about it. So as long as you don't have any huge, you know, if you're painting knotty pine cabinets, you're going to have a bunch of inclusions and things like that. And yeah, it's sort of universal. Most people are very concerned with this grain. You can fill it, but by the time you fill it many times over, sand it and clean it off and paint it, you will be at replacement cost. Remember that you can get brand new cabinet doors, at least in my area, from a cabinet maker for between 30 and 50 bucks a piece, custom made. So add up your labor and figure out if it's worth it to just go get some poplar or some maple or some alder cabinet doors made up, instead of trying to hide all the grain in the oak. But just know that, again, don't waste your time worrying about the grain in that stuff. If it's a good finish coat of paint, it covers a lot of it very well, and the darker color you go actually helps hide that too. So, and here is a whole cabinet door finished in that Navajo white like I showed you before. You can see the stepped layers of paint there. I use this to illustrate my process to the homeowners between oil primer, first coat of paint and then second coat of paint, just to kind of show them how I build my thickness and how it all turns out there. So yeah, there's the Navajo white. And also, you know, if Navajo white or that is not enough for you, I enameled the bottom of this guy in Navajo white, and then I did 3 sort of treatments to it here. We have a sort of amber glaze here in the cracks, if somebody wants kind of a warm look. We have like a chocolate brown or a sienna brown, kind of Van Dyke brown glaze here. And then in the bottom, I actually distressed it. This is actually, you know, just scuff sanding off the edges here. So these are 3 of the sort of easiest treatments if you want to do something to your cabinets, but not hopefully make them super trendy or dated. Okay, we'll do some scrolling here. Well, thanks for everybody joining here. Very kind words from Chris Shank. I'm not sure if anybody deserves something like that. Jose Aravello, who needs primer? Paint and primer in one. Yeah, that's something that I fight all the time with my homeowners. Behr came out with primer and paint in one, and it's been a sort of marketing coup for them. All the other paint companies, homeowner driven and hardware store paint companies are sort of chasing that. With respect, it's not a good primer, it's not a good paint. I think of my coatings kind of like race cars. There are off-road racing vehicles, there are Formula One racers. If they switch, they are horrible at those other jobs, but in their right case, if you use them the right way, they are absolutely perfect. I use specific primers because they are good at adhesion. They are horrible protectors of whatever they are, but they stick well. I use top coats because they're great protectors, sometimes horrible adhesion. So if you use them together, you'll get a good result. So yes, I am morally opposed to primer and paint in one. Even my coatings from the good professional companies that say this is a self-priming product, I still prime underneath them on Behr material. So thank you for that, Jose. I commiserate with you fully. Leanne Lane, we have honey oak cabinets. Can I use glaze to darken and add more depth? Yeah, absolutely. Sorry I didn't see that sooner, but yeah, the glaze there is a great way to add a little depth. And actually, on I'll show you this other one here. I actually did that to this oak cabinet. This is the one that I did myself. I actually did, and this is for a homeowner that had oak cabinets like the oak, but they just wanted it to look more rustic. So I did 2 versions of glaze, and they were looking for more like a coffee glaze, not that deep Van Dyke brown. So I did a lighter and a darker here, and simply just wiped those into the crevices there. Now, what I normally do, if anybody knows or is familiar with sign painting, they have these special brushes with very long bristles that are really floppy. They're very, very fine bristles. They're like little artist brush, but they got the floppy end to it. What I do is take a painter's plate or a cup cover or something and put my glaze, and I like oil-based glaze, it gives you more open time. But I put the glaze in there and I get that sign painter's brush in there and slather it up, and it gets a good tip, and you can actually lay it down like you're writing letters on a sign the old-fashioned way. You can lay it in that groove like that. If it gets a little too wild, a little too crazy, too much for you, you can actually take a rag. You get the glaze in there, and if you hold your finger at just the right angle across this stuff here, you can see there's gaps in the grooves. If you hold it at the constant pressure like that, you will leave glaze in those grooves, but wipe it away from everything else. Water-based glaze, you're only going to get a couple minutes of open time. With oil-based glaze, it will give you longer time to do this. But experiment. They make specific glazes for that. If you go to, I found a good outlet for that is like a Rockler or a Woodcraft woodworking store. They got a bunch of those sort of specific glazes or toners there that are already mixed up, and they have a little more open time. Jose, what do you think of Benjamin Moore sticks? Haven't used it. I have such a good sort of dependable system with my you know, like Zinsser cover stain or the Benjamin Moore, the Sherwin-Williams oil primers, that I haven't really gone to any of that. The sticks, I believe, is a top coat. With this stuff here, It's readily available. It's a very good product, and I feel it dries a little harder. I have experimented with it in the past. They actually sell it at my hardware store in town. I just felt like it was tacky. You know, I think it would be for the professional, people expect a little harder finish. So having said that, I think it might be a little more easier for the homeowners to use, and I've actually seen a lot of you pros give good reviews on it. So if you guys have good systems with that, I definitely don't poo-poo them, but you know, when you find something that works, I'm really not in favor of throwing that up into the wind, because when I do an estimate on these cabinets for my homeowners, I want to say, yes, this is exactly what you get, this is my process, it's dependable, and I know it's going to work well. So unless something can improve upon that, I will definitely keep going with that. But thank you for your input. Carolyn Borgen, will all these instructions be only for true wood? If there is wood or wood veneer, all you have to do is this process with the oil primer. If it's a melamine, if it's a formica, if it's some other surface, a pre-finished sort of factory, either a sealed, like vacuum sealed veneer over the top, something like that, just go through my 2 adhesion tests, the scratch test and the crosshatch test. And as long as you find a primer to do that, anything can be painted. You just have to have reasonable expectations, and you have to understand that it might take a little maintenance. And with maintenance, I should mention that wood is harder than paint, and a metal pan is harder than paint, and the wood as well. So you have to think of the cabinet door as you have a nice hard surface here. You lay down your enamel or your wood finish over the top. If you run in a metal pan or a fork or a knife into that, the paint is the weakest link. If you get a chip, especially on corners and things like that, it's not because you did a horrible job. It's because it is the weakest link in this scenario of wood, paint, pan. So don't beat yourself up over about it, especially with a single color painted cabinet. It's very easy to touch that stuff up. So usually not a big deal. Lisa Larson Johnson, do I need to use a sanding block over the primer to get rid of the brush marks? You will not get rid of the brush marks, just like you will not get rid of the grain. But if it's uniform and you've done a good job and you've bought a very expensive, super finely bristled nylon brush, you can really minimize that stuff. So if you sanded enough to get rid of the brush strokes, you will probably be sanding through that primer and have to start over. Just minimize it. Just get it smooth. Most wood has enough of a sort of deviation where it's not a perfectly smooth, it's, you know, most people assume that their cabinet doors are as smooth as the hood of their car. It's not really that way. There's a lot of grain, there's a lot of, you know, this and that. Wood is a natural product. It's got natural deviations in it. Don't beat yourself up over about it. If you do it with a brush, at least do some finish strokes with a brush. It's about the best you're going to do unless you use a sprayer on that. But sanding them doesn't hurt, and you should be sanding between coats anyway. So thank you, Lisa, for that. Joe, good to see you. I know Joe's a frequent listener here. When working with kitchen cabinets near a stove, some may have grease on them. Does sanding remove this grease, or do you run the risk of spreading the grease when sanding? Yes, and I believe, I can't remember if I mentioned that in the process though, but before priming, a lot of times what I'll do is use actually Windex. Windex has a little bit of ammonia in it, and it evaporates very easily. If there's a ton of grease stains, I find that Windex actually gets rid of a lot of that stuff around there. This after, obviously, scraping whatever residue you can. But yes, Joe, you're right. If you take a random orbital sander to greasy cabinets, you're going to heat that stuff up. It's going to smell like bacon, and it's going to stick to your sanding pad. So don't do that. But any sort of degreaser will be good. I try not to use a lot of kitchen soaps, only because it can leave a residue. I'm a fan of using either pure denatured alcohol, or, you know, in a pinch you can use a little bit of Windex on a finished surface, but just don't use Windex on bare wood. But yeah, denatured alcohol is sort of the way to go. If there's ever an adhesion problem, sometimes magically, even with my crosshatch test, my oil primers, my scratch test, sometimes you still get a little weird stuff where it kind of makes you stay up at night and wonder if it's actually going to seal. A lot of times, if you wipe it all down with rubbing alcohol, it'll stick perfectly. So when in doubt, 1 quart of rubbing alcohol and a rag and a respirator and about 20 minutes worth of rubbing, and it's just sort of belt and suspender sort of stuff there. So, but thank you for that, Joe. Yeah, Jose, I agree. I must have skipped over that grease part here. So, all right. Jose, Breakthrough, I believe that's a PPG product, is great, but don't use cover stain under it. Yeah, if you want to elaborate that, let me know. Cover stain is my kind of go-to oil primer by Zinsser. Let me know what you guys thought of that. I've always heard that you have to, Breakthrough's a great product, dries hard real quick as an enamel, but it seems to sag if you don't get it on evenly or you put it on just a little too much. So, sprayers, I have about 5 different sprayers, HVLP, I have Gracos, I have Titans, I have all sorts of stuff. A lot of stuff I pick up used hand or from old painters who retire that have maintained their stuff well. So everything is good. I've never used a bad sprayer. My little trick is that I have sprayers dedicated to oil primer, I have sprayers dedicated to enamels, and I have sprayers dedicated to like architectural coatings, you know, the industrial metal finishes on tin sheds up here and things like that. So I'm not running into compatibility issues. There's not a bunch of snot and other stuff in those lines. If you're a homeowner doing this stuff and you have just sort of a simpler sprayer, what you want to do is really spend the time cleaning out those lines, especially when you go from a product like an oil primer to a hybrid or a water-based thing. Those are two incompatible materials, and if you still have bits of that in all the filters and stuff, you're going to have some adhesion problems, or you may get some fish eyes and some other weird stuff. So, but yeah, I've used just about everything. I just use my airless stuff. This winter, I will be experimenting with air-assisted airless. In an effect to improve my process, but so far my airless stuff has worked really, really well. Let's see. Yeah, Jose, you labeled just about every off-white I've seen there. Danny, I've had coverage problems in the past with Sherwin-Williams Alabaster, but it worked great. The last time I used it, could have been a product change or formula. You know what's funny? A lot of these things change here or there, or you feel like the stuff's got a little bit different smell or feel, and I often wonder if they tweak it without really, you know, relaunching the product like that. And I have seen that as well too. So, all right. Well, I think that's it, everyone. Thank you to everybody who showed up at the New Prague Parade this last week. We had a lot of people in the parade. I think we tossed out about 15 or 20 gallons worth of mini Reese's Pieces and a whole bunch of business cards. And thank you, everybody. We had a great reception here in New Prague. Thanks for all your support. All of these videos will be archived on my Facebook page. They will also be archived on my YouTube page. If you look for Nick Slavic Painting and Restoration, Ask a Painter, any of that stuff, you'll find all my videos archived there. YouTube actually being the, I get them numbered, I get them described, and it's a little more cataloged version versus Facebook. What else here? Website is currently being redone. I will leave my old website in place. It's still got all my social media links on there, all my information, but a large component of my new website will be a lot of the Ask a Painter stuff and some other videos that we're producing right now. So in a month's time, give or take, about the time we move inside for the year, I will have some more multimedia stuff and a new website for you guys to see. Tomorrow morning, I am headed down to Florida on a little vacation to a deserted desert island. Redundant, but I will try, if I have cell reception, to do my Ask a Painter from there live. Maybe we'll discuss some issues in coastal Florida. If not, if I cannot get it live, I will tape something and I will post it, you know, Friday morning again as well. I'm looking for topics if you guys want to go over some topics, so send me anything you want me to do a treatise on. I'll be happy to go through my notes, go through my archive of pictures, my digital archive. If I need to, I will research something for you. Otherwise, send your questions, send your topic suggestions to me, and especially if you have some questions for the people not in cold, rainy, miserable Florida or Minnesota right now. If you live in a coastal area and you have any particular concerns, whether it be the saltwater, storms, bugs, other things like that, send them to me, and I'll see if I can't compile those, and maybe we'll do a tropical edition of Ask a Painter for this next week. So, thank you all for watching this. Thank you all for the questions. I've been overwhelmed by everybody's interaction with this. Thank you guys for posting pictures of all the mugs that have been showing up on your doors. I appreciate it. So next time, next week, we will see you guys later. Have a good week, and yeah, thanks again, guys.